There are times when voids or credits have to be issued to customers who cancel their orders or return items. So how does Credit Card Advantage work with these types of transactions? Before we begin, let's take a quick look at how these transaction types are defined within the scope of CCA. A void is issued for unsettled but approved sale transactions. A credit, on the other hand, is issued for settled sale transactions. There are two types of credit transactions that can be issued in CCA: reference credit and non-reference credit. We'll talk about this some more and the ways to process these transactions later on. For now, let's take a quick look at the two ways to process void transactions using CCA. The first way is by processing the void through the void or delete function in the sales document. Let's open an unsettled invoice document in the sales transaction entry window that has an associated credit card transaction. If we go to Actions, we see options to void as well as delete the document. CCA supports both of these options. However, most companies prefer not to delete the document for record tracking purposes. So in that case, let's just issue a void. This prompt will then be displayed. Another prompt shows up asking, "Are you sure you want to void this record?" Yes, we do, so click Void. Another prompt appears on our screen asking, "Process credit or void now or save to batch for later processing." If we would like to process immediately, click Process. If we want to save it to a batch for later processing, click Batch. If we save to a batch, CCA will create a delete batch. Void transactions will be saved to this delete batch for processing at a later time from the batch verification window. For now, let's click Process. As you can see, we get a response back stating that the transaction was approved. If we take a look at the transaction report, we do see that the void transaction was successfully processed for the customer. The second way to process a void transaction is by removing the credit card payment line through the sales payment entry window. This void can only be done against an unposted sales document. Let's open an unsettled invoice document in the sales transaction entry window that has an associated credit card transaction. Click on the blue arrow next to the amount received field to bring up the sales payment entry window. Select the credit card payment line, then click Remove. There, a prompt will be displayed. Click OK. You will see another prompt from GP asking, "Do you wish to delete this line item?" Yes, we do, so click Delete. The transaction was approved, so this means that the void has been issued. The transaction report shows that the void was successfully processed. Now for credit transactions. As I mentioned earlier, credits are issued for settled transactions, and there are two types: reference credit and non-reference credit. A reference credit uses information from an original sale transaction in order to issue a credit to the customer. An origination ID must be provided in order to issue a reference credit. A reference credit will occur when you delete a sales document or simply remove a payment line from the unposted document with a settled transaction. The latter process may sound familiar since this is basically what we just did a few moments ago when we processed the void for an unsettled transaction. The difference is, this time we are dealing with a settled transaction, so it's a credit that must be issued. So here's one example of how to issue this type of credit. In the document, click on the arrow next to amount received. This opens the sales payment entry window. All we need to do to remove the payment line for the credit card that was used is to select and then remove. You will now see this prompt from GP. Click OK. You will see another prompt from GP asking, "Do you wish to delete this line item?" Yes, we do, so click Delete. Select the option to view the transaction report on our screen. But first, we see the results window showing us that the transaction was approved. Now we are looking at the transaction report, which shows that the credit transaction was successfully processed. Going back to the sales payment entry window, we see that the payment line has been removed. All we need to do now is zero out the amount received, then close the window. Notice in the sales transaction entry window that the amount received is now also zero because we have successfully credited the payment. Another way to issue a reference credit is by creating a return document, then associating it with the originating ID or transaction ID from a previous sale transaction. So let's create a return document for this customer. Notice that after we enter the quantity, the sales returned quantities entry window appears on our screen. Let's put the item back to the on-hand bucket. Since the customer is returning 1, let's put 1 here. We'll do a credit transaction, so go to Additional, then Sale or Credit Transaction, or use the shortcut keys Ctrl+S. Now we have the e-transaction entry window. Since this is a return document, the transaction type automatically defaults to credit. Click on the lookup icon next to the originating ID field to bring up the list of originating IDs for this customer. Select the ID you need to associate with this credit transaction. At this point, the user simply needs to process the transaction. An approved message comes back from the processor, and if we take a look at the transaction receipt on our screen, we'll see that the credit has been successfully applied to the customer's card. A non-referenced credit, on the other hand, does not need any information from an original sale transaction in order to issue a credit to the customer. So let's say a customer sends back an item. We'll go through the same process of creating a return document in the sales transaction entry window as we did just a few moments ago. The difference here, as you'll see shortly, is that we will not associate this with an originating ID. Again, notice that after we enter the quantity, the sales return quantities entry window appears. Let's put the item back in the on-hand bucket as we did earlier. At this point, we are ready to issue the credit. Go to Additional, Sale or Credit Transaction, or use the shortcut keys Ctrl+S to bring up the e-transaction entry window. Again, notice that for transaction type, it defaults to credit since this is a return document. As I mentioned earlier, since this is a non-reference credit, we will not associate an originating ID this time. Click Process. The transaction was approved, and as you can see in the transaction receipt, we successfully credited this amount to the customer's card. And that ends this section on how to process void and credit transactions using CCA.